So I have a problem. Recently, I've seen a lot of TikToks and Instagram posts of people saying that they wish that they had grown up or like being a teenager in the 2010s, specifically like 2016 time period. And honestly, it's really interesting as someone who was a teen at that time, just to wonder like what's going on? Why, honestly? I mean, we had great music, but why? Hi, I'm Anna, and I think I know stuff. And so today I'm going to yap about nostalgia. So there's a lot of trends right now that seem to reference these past like 10 to 20 years. And it's a lot of like younger people sharing these trends, right? This music and certain artists and things of the sort. And obviously, as someone who grew up during that time period and who was, fully conscious during that time period, I've been diving back in with it and really starting to feel nostalgic about these things that I experienced or maybe didn't experience. And I really enjoyed getting to revisit, different TV shows and YouTube channels and music and all of these things. Obviously, all of these things are really just about feeling nostalgic and like missing a certain youthfulness or a certain feeling that I used to have, perhaps, or maybe that I missed out on. And I guess that's mainly my question right now is like, what's going on and why? What is nostalgia? And how do we feel it? How do we release it? So while I've really been enjoying engaging in these media texts, in rewatching things, and re-listening to music, and finding like old artists again, I am stuck in this feeling of nostalgia. And in my post-master's degree brain, I really want to understand what's going on here. So first of all, why are these trends even back? So we can think about media, right? And then thinking about this feeling of nostalgia and how we engage with media and potentially how do we release this feeling? So yes, I can feel nostalgic, but like what then? What happens? How does it go away? Do I just feel this way forever? So obviously I wanted to start us off with a fun dictionary definition of nostalgia. So Merriam-Webster describes nostalgia as a sad pleasure experienced in recalling what no longer exists. A wistful or sentimental yearning for a return to or the return of some real or romanticized past period or some irrecoverable past condition or setting. So like a state of being homesick and homesickness. And so, some important words here. The return of something real or romanticized. So it can be something that actually happened or something that we're just imagining. But importantly, something that no longer exists. And that, to me, that just means like we can never actually return to it, right? Like that's important. That is fundamental to this feeling of nostalgia. So then in thinking about what causes nostalgia, I turn to some peer-reviewed research, and feel free to skip this if this isn't your type of vibe. But here we go. So nostalgia involves a mental timeline or a mental transportation to experiences. Fundamentally, though, nostalgia is about sentimental longing or wistful affection for one's remembered experiences. So specifically, this common theme in nostalgia being about memory and how we remember things. And I think that that's where we get this blurry line of like something that, first of all, no longer exists, right? So like whatever's in our memory is not physically tangible, but also the fact that like our memory can change the reality of things. So like I can remember something a specific way and that's not actually what happened. And so I think that that's really central to nostalgia, is that like it's about memory, but it's about specifically the memory and not necessarily the reality of the situation. And what I found really interesting here is that some earlier research suggests that nostalgia is a negative emotion and a neurological disease related to depression, anorexia, and other psychological disorders. But more modern research says that those conclusions were more based on correlation rather than causation. So meaning that, while people were in these sad, down states, that they would experience nostalgia. If you're I don't know, having a bad Christmas, for example, you're going to reflect on a time that was positive, perhaps. Like you're going to remember when you were a kid and everything was great. Nostalgia is not necessarily the sad, bad thing, but rather how we think through certain negative affects. So nostalgia, not necessarily a sad, bad thing, right? But it is this feeling where we're just remembering stuff and wanting to be back in that time period, perhaps. Now let's contextualize it with now and with the media. I've been diving back into a lot of the things that I've been into that I was a fan of when I was younger. So like I was a big Tumblr teen, and now I'm back on there and reliving all of my fandom, plus some newer ones that I've added on as I've gotten older, and that's been really fun. But it's important to note that I'm not the only one. Like I've noticed a lot of people around my age and older have been going back to Tumblr, to Twitter, to whatever it was that they engaged with when they were younger, specifically to re-engage with the media that they were into. So we're going to hop right into the media part because that's my bread and butter. So film and TV, we know that things are always getting rebooted, and, you know, whatever our opinions are on reboots and, you know, sequels or whatever, we tend to engage with the things that we liked previously. So that's the main goal of these media producers, is to create media that's going to bring back older audiences as well as engage new ones. And so that's what I'm looking at specifically, is how are they catering to these older audiences? So I'm going to just give you an example here. We're going to talk about the Barbie movie. So Barbie movie came out a couple of years ago, and like, yeah, it's catering to young girls, but specifically, I think that it's catering to my age group. So like 20s to 30s, girlies who were growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, playing with Barbies. And here's why. These Barbies that they showed in the movie were my Barbies, or like not necessarily my Barbies, but they were Barbies that I saw at the store that I wanted, or that I witnessed, you know, happening. For example, we have the creepiest Barbie, Midge, who was the pregnant Barbie, and in the movie they like highlight that she is weird. And I have this vivid memory of walking into the toy store and seeing this pregnant Barbie and saying, I want this Barbie, and my mom being like, that's weird. And then I saw a picture, or maybe it was the actual doll with her stomach open. Ew. That turned me off.
Oh, hell no.
Nope. And then we have the video camera Barbie. I don't know what her official name is, but essentially she has like a camera on her chest, and then like the video screen on her back, and like some buttons. And I didn't personally have this Barbie because I thought it was weird. I wanted my Barbie to have like a human body and not a camera body. But I had a friend who had it, and I've never actually seen this Barbie like work, maybe for good reason. But I always thought it was weird, or at least maybe like now as an adult, I think it's weird that someone was like, yeah, let's put a camera in these young girls' bedroom. But like I remember that Barbie, and I had friends who had that Barbie, and it was a weird Barbie, but I remember her. And then lastly is my favorite is the poopy dog. So this dog was only seen in Weird Barbie's house, I think like in the background for like a little bit in the movie, but it's essentially is a dog that it came with kibble, and if you can hear fireworks, don't even fucking worry about it. But it's the dog that would come with kibble, and it was like magnetic, and you would press the tail of the dog and the dog would eat the kibble. And then you had to like tip it back a little bit so that the Tic Tac sized kibble would move to the back of the dog. And then you the tail, and it would poop the kibble out. And it was So funny. But it was great. It was a great dog toy. It was so goofy, and I'm so glad that it was in the movie. Something about it was just like, wow, that's for me. That was my Barbie. That was my toy. So like, this is all to say that while the movie was obviously for like young girls and women and about like growing up and what all that means in like a society and how like feminism and how women are treated in society, all of that. But like specifically because of the Barbies that they reference, and that's, noting that they did have, classic first Barbie with the striped bodysuit, and then like Alan, who is also way before my time. I think it's important to note that most of the Barbies that they showed were from the 90s to now, specifically this like 90s to 2000s period. And the people who played with those Barbies, who saw those Barbies in commercials and all of that, are now in their 20s and 30s. And like, we recognize those Barbies, So obviously we're going to go watch this movie and we're going to feel a certain connection just because it brings us back to our own childhood. So some other examples of this, of, trying to touch back in with people's childhood, can be things like Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters and new Lilo and Stitch and Freakier Friday and so many other things. And the main purpose of all of this media is to make us feel closer to our younger selves, perhaps. Maybe to like renew those feelings of youthfulness, of childhood, of maybe like a childhood wonder. And like, the truth is that those of us who grew up in the 90s and the 2000s now maybe have the money to spend on things. So like, we were children, we didn't have jobs. So, we got whatever our parents could get us. And now that we have the money, we have jobs, we are able to actually spend on those things. So those of us that have kids can also, go watch a Barbie movie with a daughter, perhaps. And they can be like, wow, I love that. Let's go to Walmart. And now I see the doll and I want that doll. And me, in my like, oh my God, this is a moment for me to connect with this child on something that I loved when I was a child, I'm going to buy that toy. And so, you make a movie child friendly, you can watch it with your kids, but then you're also still getting that person in touch with something from their own childhood. And I've seen a lot of like parents talk about how like, oh, I really wish my kid was into blah, 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 because then I could, help them, introduce it to them. And I think that that's part of it, is to like form a bridge between generations. But, capitalism, so end goal is always a profit. Oh, brother. Music. Music's an area that I've been having a lot of fun with, and that really surprised me. And specifically, I think very like recession indicator is like a big fun meme that I've seen with music. And I think that this is specifically thinking about like how Pitbull, the musician, has come back, how he's like popping off again. And if you don't know, then there's like this trend of younger women going to Pitbull concerts wearing bald caps and suits, so essentially dressing up like Pitbull, and honestly having the time of their lives. And I'm really jealous of them. But when I saw all of that, I was wondering like, how did we get here? Pitbull was popular when I was young, but even then I don't think he was like that popular. So it's really fun to see him popping off in, 2025. Notably, I think Pitbull is known for his like iconic recession pop line. I knew my rent was going to be late about a week ago. I worked my ass off, but I still can't pay it though. But I got just enough to get up in this club, have me a good time before my time is up. And like, this was from 2014, from the song Time of Our Lives featuring Neo. But it's important because of how it classifies a very specific time in like economically specifically. So like I said, it's recession pop, and recession pop is loosely defined as a style of music predominantly associated with dance pop and electropop that emerged during the Great Recession in the United States in the late 2000s to early 2010s. So specifically, it's seen as starting around 2008 because of the housing crash, the global financial crisis, and we really don't see this ending, like specifically in like theming and songs, until the early 2010s. I want to say around 2015 is when things change. Specifically, the lyrics were really centered around embracing hedonism and youthfulness and freedom and this constant partying in the midst of an economic recession. So this is where we get songs like I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas, or Just Dance by Lady Gaga, and TikTok by Kesha, and Teenage Dream by Katy Perry, or as Reddit highlights, the predominance of tonight songs. So these are just songs that mention something is happening tonight. Everything is tonight. Tonight's the last night, and tonight is about having fun tonight. So why is recession pop back? Well, recession's back. Basically, at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that there's a correlation between nostalgia and depression. And then I want to contextualize the fact that like we faced a big event, global event, where a large amount of the population suffered, physically, mentally, in all ways, in 2020. And specifically in the United States, this became a period of extreme uncertainty. And I want to talk about the United States because that's the best context that I have, because that's where I was at the time. So this period of uncertainty was not just from a public health perspective, but in a lot of other areas as well. So if you remember, the summer of 2020, we had the Black Lives Matter movement where people took to the streets protesting. And then we had elections right after that. And then we had January 6th happen. And so many other things have just been like coming up since then. And, this was a time when we were feeling extremely isolated. We were far away from each other. Nobody was sure about what we could do, what we couldn't do. We were seeing people do things that we didn't necessarily agree with. And it was just a big, messy time. And during that time, I think a lot of us believed, or there was a trend on social media that like when we get out of this, lockdown, we're going to go crazy. We're going to go out there and we're going to party it up. And like that didn't happen. And obviously like we have all these other huge things that have affected us. So like we have the big beautiful bill, we have a recession and rising unemployment rates, as well as tariffs and so many other things that like lead to social and economic instability. So humans generally look for a way to cope with these feelings, and like how are we going to get through this moment of turmoil, of uncertainty, of whatever is going on. To bring us back to 2020 timeline, imagine you're there and you're alone and you're scared and you don't know what's going on and you can't talk to most people because like I guess you can text them, but everybody's having a moment. And then TikTok comes along. There's just this little app that seems to connect you to other people, and we share music and we share our thoughts on things, and it seems so fun. And something that we're doing on there is we're talking about current issues, and we're talking about the things that we think. And a lot of times what we're going to do as humans is we're going to look for a time that was similar to this. So I don't know about y'all, but when everything started for me, I was looking around like, okay, when was the last time something similar happened? So yeah, not like plague, but eventually we look at like, oh, recession. When was the last time a recession happened? 2008. So we're online and we're talking about, what caused it and how people dealt with it and the things that happened. And oopsie poopsie, now we're listening to the same music, and we're back to, listening to Pitbull and saying like, look at how fun this was. Yeah, rent was going to be late, but like they were partying it up. And that's where we start seeing a lot more recession pop. But then we also have the new artists that I personally like to refer to as my Powerpuff Girls. So like Charlie XCX with Brat Summer. We have Chappell Roan with The Rise and Fall of the Midwest Princess. And then Sabrina Carpenter with everything she's been doing and her nearly endless tour that has finally ended. But essentially, like, they bring back this like party girl, I don't want to say sexed up, but like free and embracing their sexuality and themselves and having fun despite everything in society. But in all of this, we also have the older artists that kind of come back with new music that bring back those same feelings. So like we have seen Katy Perry make various attempts. But then we also have someone like Kesha coming out with Joyride, and Beyonce with Renaissance, and then Lady Gaga with Abracadabra, and all of these musicians trying to bring back, or not really trying, but like bringing back a feeling, right, of party, of joy that was more popular in the like aughts, in the mid-aughts, 2010s-ish. So with all of this, how do we get to a bunch of girls going to Pitbull concerts in bald caps and suits? So maybe in some ways we did wait until lockdown was over to like go crazy. And like statistically, no. This generation drinks less and goes out less and parties less. That's not to say that they don't want to have fun. I think fun has just changed how we take part in it, right? It doesn't mean that like I don't want to go out and drink or I don't want to go out, but like I don't necessarily need to do that messiness that perhaps was more glorified earlier generations. So I think with all of this, it's important to consider that like we are in a recession, and this now is going to be contextualized with that in mind, that like the way that we can have fun now is considering how much disposable income we have. This might primarily apply to people who are after college age, who are of working age, who have been working for a little while, so they have some disposable income. And, you know, rather than me having to go out and spend a bunch of money on alcohol and then the next day feel awful because I'm nearing my 30s and my body is not the same, then like instead I'm going to find something that I know I'm actually going to have fun and that I'm not going to suffer the next day. I think that that's where we get this rebirth of these older musicians. So like I never got a chance to see certain musicians when I was like 12, but now I have money, so I'm gonna go spend my own grown-up money to go watch them because they're back on tour for some reason. Yeah, we have the Jonas Brothers touring again, and Hannah Montana, I've heard, and yeah, Pitbull, and if you're me, yes, My Chemical Romance twice. So like yeah, we're gonna try to have fun in the ways that we can, in the ways that make sense for us, that are guaranteed to allow us to have fun and not, I don't know, waste money perhaps. So why is recession pop back? Essentially because I feel like we have to balance out these like scary times with some good happy times and have some semblance of like stability. So, like, while no, I can't afford to buy a house in the US, like, I can save my money and go see someone that I idolized as a child, because, like, a $300 to $1,000 concert ticket is still way cheaper than a mortgage or even rent in some places. And, like, at least I don't have to talk to a banker or a landlord and, like, beg them to please let me live somewhere. You know, like, it just makes more sense that I'm just going to spend my money on something that is like guaranteed that I will have fun and that I can afford and that is good for me, my mental health. So what about these people who are going to these concerts and like they aren't the kids who grew up listening to Pitbull? So like this nostalgia for things that we didn't necessarily experience. We're wanting to experience things that maybe we didn't get a chance to the first time. So, like, I grew up singing Kesha's "Before I Leave, Brush My Teeth with a Bottle of Jack." 'Cause when I leave for the night, I ain't coming back. And like, I wasn't doing that, obviously, but importantly, it's about those kids who didn't even experience that as a child. Like, I was a middle schooler singing that with some friends, but like, what about the kids who were either little kids, so like didn't hear that, or hearing it now? For example, I've seen a lot of teens romanticizing growing up in the 2000s, 2010s, specifically being a teenager in 2016, like being in high school in 2016, which is really crazy to me because
What the hell?
was a teenager in 2016. And like, it was fun.
It was that cool to be a teenager in 2016. You should feel bad about it, and you did miss out. FOMO, 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 FOMO. Nightmare, FOMO, FOMO.
Fine. And like, I don't know what's up with those feelings. Why do these teens crave for a time that they didn't get to experience that isn't even that long ago? So for this, I'm going to come back to my original definition of nostalgia, which is this recalling what no longer exists, a wistful or sentimental yearning for a return to or the return of some real or romanticized thing. So like, emphasis on romanticized right here. I was a teenager in 2016, and while I do miss some of those times, I think I got out of it whatever I got out of it. Like, I was living it. I was, going out with friends, and I was listening to Florida Georgia Line and Broccoli and like all of these things with my friends as like we drove down to the beach. So, I got to experience it. And that was almost 10 years ago. In the grand scheme of things, that's not that long ago for me. And like, bear with me as I'm about to do some math here. But like, I'm 27. So that's like 10 years ago, out of my 27 years. That's about 37% of my life ago. Versus when I was 12 years old, which is about 55% of my life ago. My point is that if you're currently around 16, 18, 10 years ago was like 62% of your life ago. That's like most of your life. Like, most of your life has happened since then. And like, thinking about how memories form and when we form these memories, like, most things are going to be more recently and when we're more grown. So those things from when you were, 10 years ago, when you were 6 years old, you don't remember as much, and maybe they seem more exciting versus like 10 years ago, like I already had fully formed, memories and emotions and all of those things. Not to say a 6-year-old doesn't. I don't know much about child development, but like, you understand the difference here. So yeah, so if you were a little kid during those times and you're just now finding out about these old styles or this old music or whatever, and MySpace and Y2K, it can all seem like such a long time ago. And I think human curiosity really gets us to like dive deep into these things and try to find ourselves in them and to understand them better in some way. And it's obviously always easier for you to look at something that you weren't a part of, like a time that you didn't live in, because there's really nothing to lose. You don't know the bad parts, because a lot of times when we talk about certain decades or certain time periods, we might focus on like a couple specific attributes, especially if you're like, I really like the aesthetic, then like, you're not going to talk about like why or like what was bad about those times. We're just going to think about what we enjoy, and it's not real. You're never going to go back to it. So who cares? You don't get to redo it, and you didn't have any bad experiences during that time because it's not necessarily in your like memory. So you get to adopt the little things that you do like about it. A better way to contextualize this is when we like think about people who enjoy the aesthetics of the 50s or the 80s and those time periods. We don't necessarily want to go back to those times. Women and people of color and disabled people, like, we don't want to go back to a time when we were oppressed or we were treated poorly or we had less rights. But with that being said, we can still appreciate certain aspects of it. We don't need to prescribe to everything of that time period. Yeah, you can prescribe me an orgasm for my womanly depression, but like definitely don't give me a lobotomy for just being a party girl. Shout out to the Kennedys. So like, that's it. We old folk, or as some people like to call us unk, think it's crazy that these young people want to live in our youth, even though like we know it wasn't that great. I like to think about how like at least we didn't experience lockdown. Like I was in college in 2020. In a lot of ways, like at least I wasn't, in those formative years. Any time between elementary to high school would have been a terrible time to be in lockdown. So yeah, I'm gonna be happy when I see that these kids really wish that they had grown up when I did, because like it was fun. In hindsight, it was fun. It was a good time. And I hope that these kids are able to enjoy whatever piece they think is interesting about growing up in that time period. So in conclusion, there's like a million things that I can mention in terms of nostalgic feelings. So like YouTube, personally, Dan and Phil coming back and confirming their relationship. And then we have video games where I have some friends who replay Kingdom Hearts. I personally love playing The Sims and Teen Titans. And I think that this is all so cute. It's such a cute way for us to connect with ourselves, our younger selves, as well as like newer generations and older generations and everyone in between. And so initially when I started this video, I was learning about like what was the release to nostalgia, right? So like you're sad, you cry, you're angry, you punch something, you're happy, you jump and cheer. So then the question is like, what's the release to nostalgia, right? If we can never return to it by definition, then what? Like we're just stuck with this feeling? Wouldn't that eventually lead us to feeling bad and like not wanting to feel nostalgic? So my argument here is that nostalgia is about feeling happiness and sadness. And it's all about how you approach it. So like while you can just sit there and think, man, I really miss when I would come home from school and just watch cartoons with my sibling and wait for lunchtime. Or you can like log into Netflix and watch Pokemon Indigo with your roommate and have yourself a little snack. And like, no, you're not reliving whatever childhood you had. It's not going to be a one-to-one experience because you're no longer in that time period, but it can bring you a little bit closer to that version of yourself. And like it can bring back some good feelings that can be associated with that previous time, as well as bring you closer to the people currently in your life. So like a roommate rather than your sibling. So like I think that there is something about putting yourself back in the moment in whatever way you can to try to experience that joy all over again, all just so we can try to get like a little bit better of an understanding of who we are as people, what our values are, and what is most important to us, and whatever we need in this current time in our lives. When we think about nostalgia, I think if we look at it as a way of bringing us back to ourselves, then it can be really fundamental. It's good that we remember the good times so that we can make it through the bad times. And this is where I like to quote this icon from the club. The club is bumping, the ladies look good, the alcohol is flowing. There is much pain in the world, but not in this room. So I guess that's all to say that, you can spend your day rotting in bed, watching Yowie compilations or playing a bootleg version of Crash Bandicoot, because tomorrow is coming no matter what, so you might as well go into it with a little bit more joy in whatever way that looks like to you. So anyway, I'm going to go dye my hair because emo's back, so